just take a little time out here to talk about this. That first phrase, I'll not give a poison to anyone who asks to do so. What's the context? Well, in ancient Greece, actually more so than we do today, they struggled with controlling pain. So if you had metastatic cancer or nerve compression, sometimes a patient that couldn't escape their pain would come to the physician and say, can you give me a medication to let me end my life as a way of ending this pain? So here Hippocrates says, I will not give a poison to anyone who asks to do so. So why? Why would Hippocrates say this when this was sort of the norm for ancient Greece? Well, it's because Hippocrates was actually a Pythagorean. And in Pythagorean philosophy, we know Pythagoras as the mathematician, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But it turns out he's also a philosopher. And at the base of Pythagorean philosophy, human life was special. Human life was a gift from the gods. It was supposed to be held and defended. So when Hippocrates was approaching to that patient with pain, he couldn't help that patient take his own or take her own life because that human life was special. And you see this in the last phrase, but in purity and in holiness I will guard my life and my art. It almost has this religious context. There's this higher moral code that Hippocrates subjected himself to. And we see in precepts, Hippocrates talks more about this. For if love of men is present, love of the art is also present. So Hippocrates devotes himself to the well-being of the individual patient. So we see through free market forces a swing of this needle from Plato. Over the next about 300 years, it swings over towards Hippocrates, from P over to H. And you can sort of imagine why this would be the case. If you're getting up in age and your knees hurt and hips hurt and your back hurt and your neck hurt, who would you see? Would you see Plato's ideal physician? Or would you see Hippocrates? Of course, if you wanted to be cared for as an individual, you'd go see the Hippocratic physician. So this needle swings over, points towards H for about the next 2,000 years. In the mid-14th century, here we find a Christianized version of the Hippocratic Oath. Because Christian theology matched Pythagorean theology very closely, we're following St. Augustine. There's something special about the human, imago Dei. We're created in the image of God. So it's very natural for Western civilization to adopt the Hippocratic ideals. And this stays the case up until we run into Friedrich Nietzsche, who writes in the late 1800s. Nietzsche begins his thinking with God is dead. And after that, he follows in Twilight of the Idols with a moral code for physicians. Section 36, a moral code for physicians. Now we're looking for patterns in thought. The invalid, Nietzsche states, is a parasite on society. In a certain state, it is indecent to go on living, to vegetate on in cowardly dependence on physicians and medications after the meaning of life, even the right to life, has been lost. This ought to entail the profound contempt of society. He goes on. Physicians, in their turn, ought to be the communicators of this contempt, not prescriptions, but every day a fresh dose of disgust for their patients. It's worth noting here, physicians ought to be the communicators of contempt. Again, a very different role for the physician. He continues, to create a new responsibility, that of the physician, in all cases in which the highest interest of life, or the ascending life, a little time out here, when you read Nietzsche, the ascending life is the young, the strong, the fit, those that are moving society forward. This demands the most ruthless suppression and sequestration of degenerating life. And again, to pause when you read Nietzsche, degenerating life are those that are a burden on society, the elderly, the weak, the infirm, those that have mental illness. For example, in determining the right to reproduce, the right to be born, in fact, even the right to live. So we see this needle swinging back towards P in the writings of Nietzsche. So following the writings of Nietzsche, we see the rise of the Third Reich, and beside me here is a picture of the Dachau hypothermia experiments. There are physicians that participated in this and other medical atrocities. And this series of experiments was supposedly done to learn how to rewarm down pilots. So they would take their victim, their subject, immerse them in vats of ice water, nearly freeze them to death, and then rewarm warm them using various methods. Sometimes they would drop them in vats of hot oil, or to put tubes down through their esophagus into their stomach, pour scalding water into their stomach, or up through the rectum, scald their colon, or open their abdominal cavity and pour in scalding water. If the victim survived, they would be nearly refrozen and put through